and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, India's border tensions with Pakistan have flared up again, with both sides shelling each other across the line of control in Kashmir. Does this skirmish have wider geopolitical implications as far as China? As today marks the World Population Day, we take a look at how the enacting and scrapping of China's one-child policy changed the dynamic of its families. And we start today's show with the latest on the deadly conflict between Pakistan and India. Pakistani military said they destroyed 2 Indian military posts and killed 4 Indian soldiers earlier this week. The clash happened right after the country protested against India's violation of a ceasefire. According to the Pakistani Foreign Ministry, 5 Pakistani civilians were killed, and the country has asked the UN to mediate.
The two sides of the conflict stick to their own argument. Pakistan's foreign ministry has summoned the Indian diplomats to launch a protest over cross-border shelling along the line of control dividing Kashmir. Islamabad said the Indian shelling has killed at least 2 civilians and called the deliberate targeting of civilians deplorable. Meanwhile, the Indian Defense Ministry said Pakistani troops also fired at Indian Army outposts in Kashmir, leaving 2 people dead and several others injured. Arch rivals India and Pakistan intermittently exchanged fire on the line of control, despite an agreement in 2003 that a ceasefire should be observed along the working boundary. According to Pakistan, this year 18 Pakistani civilians have been killed and 105 injured in the firing by both sides. India has been flexing its muscles, aiming to win 2.5 conflicts at the same time. Earlier, India was reported to have been preparing for a standoff along the China-India border, while seeking what they called a diplomatic solution. China urged India to immediately withdraw its troops that crossed the border into Chinese territory.
We have a clear and open information channel with each other, but we hope the Indian side can take concrete action and practical efforts. The current situation is India is violating the basic principle of international relations as well as the international order, and is damaging the peace and stability in the boundary area.
The Himalayan region of Kashmir has been a flashpoint between India and Pakistan for over 6 decades. It remains one of the most militarized zones in the world.
And for more on the border tensions between India and Pakistan, we are joined by a strong panel from China. Mr. Ye Hailin, Director of the Center for South Asia Studies of the National Institute of International Strategy at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome, sir. In Islamabad, we are joined by Mr. Sultan Ali, who is a defense and security analyst. Welcome as well. Meanwhile, we'd like to welcome in New Delhi Dr. Saram Shalia, who is a professor and dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Gentlemen, welcome to the 3 of you. How are we going to see the next step of this tension or reduction of tension on the border between your 2 countries? Let's go to Mr. Ali first from Islamabad.
Go ahead. Actually, it is interesting to see that the border tension between India and Pakistan comes at a time when you see Pakistan is embroiled in a political struggle of its own. But one would have expected that India would have been a little more understanding about the internal situation in Pakistan. However, you see, the situation has arisen that Pakistan is also trying to construct a mega project with the help of its strategic and long-term all-weather friend China, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which happens to be a part of the One Belt One Road vision of President Xi Jinping of China.
Mr. Shalia, what is your view? Is that a possibility for the reduction of tensions right now?
Well, I'm not very hopeful at the moment because the violence at the border is quite intense. There's shelling by both sides, and quite a few lives have been lost over the last few weeks. And simultaneously, there is a war of words going on at the diplomatic level. The Pakistani military and the Pakistani government has praised secessionist and terrorist actors fighting Indian forces as freedom fighters and as heroes and liberation warriors and so on. And Indian position is that these are mostly jihadist actors and driven by Islamic extremism and fundamentalism, and that there is no way we can compromise on our territorial integrity and sovereignty in Kashmir, which is being challenged by these jihadis who are supported by Pakistan. So I think until and unless there is a kind of a revision in the Pakistani position on this matter about ratcheting up pressure on India about so-called self-determination or freedom movement in Kashmir, I don't think there's only any way we are going to step back from this.
Mr. Hali, you want to respond to that accusation?
Yeah, you see, what is happening in Indian-held Kashmir, as we like to call it, is that in 1947 and 1948, India and Pakistan went to war. The then Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, went to the United Nations, and the United Nations passed resolutions according to which there is supposed to be a plebiscite, and the people of Kashmir on both sides are supposed to decide their fate, whether they want to accede to India and Pakistan. But for the last nearly 70 years now, India has not permitted this plebiscite to take place, because if the United Nations resolutions are enforced, then I think the problem can be resolved once for all, and we will not have this bone of contention. But as far as the allegation of Pakistanis supporting the jihadis is concerned, I don't agree to that, because Pakistan is itself suffering at the hands of jihadis. More than 70,000 Pakistanis have been killed. As far as the Kashmiris are concerned, Pakistan does provide moral and diplomatic support, but nothing beyond that.
Okay. Mr. Ye, yes. You heard the arguments coming from both sides, your Indian and Pakistani colleagues. What do you make of the current crisis? Is there a possibility that we can put to an end?
Actually, it's not only in this studio I hear these differences between India and Pakistan. As for my personal experience, I witnessed a lot of the similar argument for the last years. But we should recognize that this gunshot, or not only the gunshot, it's a crossfire happened recently. It's not an individual case. Actually, the Kashmir suffered from the unrest is already lasted for almost 1 year since the death of the Wani. Actually, this is just a 1 year anniversary of his death. So I think we should put in this as a background. It will last, and there is no solution. But we also should notice that both sides, India and Pakistan, is not prepared for the total war or for the comprehensive engagement, military engagement. They are still control the scale of the conflict. So I'm saying that we are not hoping that the conflict will be settled down very soon, but we are not, the situation won't be worsened to the very large scale bloody conflict. I think we just between this.
Mr. Talia, do you agree with that? What kind of message do you think this quite small scale, controlled, and yet certainly worrisome crossfire just happened between India and Pakistan mean to both sides?
I agree with our Chinese friend that it will not intensify into a full-fledged war or large-scale confrontation. But you know, if you look at it in a longer-term perspective, it has been a kind of medium intensity war, one way, whether you call it or not, because since the series of attacks on Indian military camps over the last couple of years, it is seen as you know, an uptick in the tensions, and I don't think we are going to scale them back simply because there is you know, a limit to the endurance of the Indian tolerance that's been tested. So I think whatever strategic restraint was there in the past, I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants to send a message that you know, we cannot keep on absorbing blow after blow without responding. But having said that, India has made some very bold initiatives for peace with Pakistan in the past. Just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, in December 2015, Prime Minister Modi took a big personal personal political gamble by visiting Lahore and meeting his counterpart, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. And it looked like a hopeful chapter was about to emerge, but then it all went back to these attacks by jihadis. So I think, even China, I should be concerned about it, because although our friend mentioned the China-Pakistan economic corridor, it passes through terrain which is infested with these hardline radical Islamists. And I think unless those are rooted out, we are not going to overcome the insecurity spiral that's happening in the entire region.
All right, great point there, Dr. Shalia. I want to bring that point to our Pakistani colleagues as well. What about that? 2 years ago, there seemed to be a window of opportunity, but 2 years passed, nothing happened. Once again, fall into the same trap.
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's surprise visit to Pakistan, and especially visiting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's own residence close to Lahore, was a very welcome step. But just after that, there was this incident of an attack on the Indian airbase of Pathankot, which rattled both sides. Although Pakistan bent backwards in trying to present its own people for finding the real culprits who were behind it, but it appears that there are non-state actors who would not like to see India and Pakistan have peace, because it suits them to have both the countries in turmoil, and that is why they create situations. But the view on the Indian side, or rather the allegations on the Indian side, have been that these attacks were perpetrated perhaps by the state of Pakistan, which is not true, because the state of Pakistan is itself upset and it was rattled by it, and it would like to find and catch those culprits.
All right. Okay, everything seems to be apparently clear. The history, the solutions, quote unquote, and the recent incidents. Now, here's the thing. With this crossfire, with the economic corridor, there seems to be concerns whether things can be done safely.
I think everybody has their own concerns, but the behavior should have the limitation that do not cross the line. That means you can express your concern, but doesn't mean you can take the violent action to express your concern, to sabotage another country's interest. It won't cost it won't be very helpful. It only cause the situation get worse.
Will this influence China's determination to do this economic corridor?
I think China will stay on this current stance that will continue the CPEC's construction, because China always emphasizes this CPEC project doesn't reflect Chinese stance over the sovereignty issue on the sovereignty issue over the Kashmir areas. But China won't accept the Indian's accusation that we built the CPEC to contain India. We built CPEC to enhance the bilateral engagement, economic cooperation between China and Pakistan.
I want to come back to Dr. Shalia. Over the past few days, a week, we see incidents between India and Pakistan. We also saw the incident between India and China. In retrospect, there has been so much changes in our part of the world, and possibly the rules of the world for the future. The concepts, the logics. But Dr. Shalia, at this point, what do you think are some of the most important qualities of countries in facing up to these changes? And how important is it that India and China, two emerging economies, be able to keep this balance well?
Well, I think we continue to view the One Belt, One Road as problematic because it not only challenges the disputed terrain and sovereignty claims in Kashmir with Pakistan, but also has a maritime dimension. And if you look at the larger picture, India, Japan, and the United States are conducting Malabar trilateral naval exercises right now, and the focus is on submarine hunting. And there is a perception that the Chinese People's Liberation Army is encroaching on India's sphere of influence, and that's been a long time concern, especially in our neighborhood. So with Bhutan, this tension you're mentioning, which is happening across the Bhutan-China-India border, there is again a concern about potential Chinese hegemony over Bhutan that may challenge India's interest there. So this is, I think, there are some unavoidable conflicts of interest, but we can continue to manage them through trust building in other spheres. For example, economics, India-China bilateral trade, the stakes are high. It is over $75 billion at the last count, and it's increasing. So we would want to attract more Chinese investments in Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative for building our manufacturing base. There's a lot that can happen, both ways in terms of economics, and the Chinese are interested in helping our bullet train initiatives. So even though they're investing $46 billion in the CPEC with Pakistan, I would like to humbly submit that India is a safer destination. First of all, we don't have jihadist problem, and secondly, higher rate of return, higher economic growth. So I think that's where the potential lies. If China thinks in terms of larger economic cooperation, peaceful coexistence, we can solve this problem.
Okay, Mr. Ye, your turn. Respond to your colleague from India about India, quote, being pressured by China on different sides. Secondly, is the economic the solution? Is the trust there for the two to increase economic ties?
Yes, I very appreciate that our Indian friend want to welcome the Chinese investment to Indian market to explore the chance. But currently, when the Indian security forces, their troops stay on the Chinese territory, it's really difficult to talk about such kind of cooperation, even for the longer project. In my understanding that India may not have the jihadist problem, but India has the border, very serious border issue, this different strategy, strategy and a different agenda between China and India. So it's really difficult for China to say that India is a safer bet than Pakistan.
Is China trying to push some of its own agenda in India's neighborhood?
I don't think so. Currently we should recognize that India is the country who has all the diplomatic relation with all the neighbors, but China doesn't. China does not have the diplomatic ties with Bhutan, and very clearly it's because of India's operation. So in my understanding that ask to China's hegemony towards the South Asia countries is really difficult to say that, but the Indian, it seems that, has the regional superpower over all the medium size or small size of the South Asia countries. So in this case, really difficult for China to accept the Indian stance over the lot of the regional issue.
Okay, now, Mr. Hali, you heard your Chinese and Indian colleagues, they also have their own issues. But here comes the same question to you from Pakistan's perspective. How can we, out of this quite chaotic crossfire of interests, be able to restrain ourselves from going one step further of going into even bigger danger, military conflict? That's not going to benefit anyone. Mr. Hali, some good solutions?
Yeah, you see, the military solution does not lie in these problem areas like Kashmir or like what's happening close to Bhutan or Daklam or the Siliguri chicken neck, whatever we call it. These are, you see, pinpricks. I remember very well that there was a problem between India and Pakistan in 1999 at Kargil, and at that time the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which happened to be the same one as the current one, Mia Nawaz Sharif, he visited China, and his Chinese counterpart gave him very good advice, and he said that instead of pursuing the solution of Kashmir through the military means, build yourself militarily. And China gave its own example that it has a sovereign claim over Taiwan, but it is not using the military option because instead China is building itself economically, and there may come a day when Taiwan will request that it wants to rejoin the mainland China. So that was a very sound advice, and what China is trying to do through the One Belt One Road or through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor are that it is trying to build economic ties so that we forget about our internal problems, we forget about our mutual problems at the border, and instead we cooperate with each other. As far as the One Belt One Road is concerned, China has invited India to be on board, and including also participate in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. If India gets on board, I'm sure we will be able to resolve our problems and build ourselves economically, and instead think about friendship and mutual coexistence rather than having confrontations.
It seems that everybody have their solutions. Of course, course, it's going to be a debate about all these solutions. But for now, I really want to express my appreciation for the three of you gentlemen, even though you come from very different interests and certainly from very different logics, but certainly you are sitting together and chatting to us, sharing with us intellectually your insights. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Ye Hailin, Sultan Ali, and Saram Shaudia. Thank you so much for being with us. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing. Still to come on our program. As today marks the World Population Day, we will find out how migrant labor and the now scrapped one-child policy impacted China's changing family dynamics. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Today marks the World Population Day, an annual event to raise awareness of global population issues. China, which has the world's largest population, used to adopt the one-child policy, which has modified into the two-child policy in 2016. These policies allow the social status of Chinese women to progress dramatically. With the advances made in our society and economy, women's role in the workforce, the family, and marriage have all changed. To know more, take a look at this.
The United Nations placed family planning as its theme for the 2017 World Population Day. The world's attention has been focused on population growth and related issues on this day every year. The world's population reached 7.5 billion this year. This growth has not erased the problems of poverty caused by gender inequality.
Failing to invest in girls is nothing less than planned poverty. Unless we invest in girls, we're planning to have a poorer future.
As this year's theme suggests, one of the most important factors to both population and gender issues is family planning. China, as the most populated country on Earth, conducted the one-child policy for nearly 4 decades. However, since 2016, China adopted the two-child policy, causing a steady growth in the birth rate.
By the end of December 2016, 1 year after the policy was put in place, the total number of people born that year was 18.6 million. That's the most number of people being born in 1 year since 2000.
The policy shift and economic development have given Chinese women more choice in their personal lives. While most Chinese people's view on raising families remains traditional, many modern women make the challenging call to balance family and work life. As the society progresses, the status of women has been elevated, enabling them to take on more social responsibility and narrow the gender gap.
And for more on the Chinese women's status in marriages, we are joined in our studio by two panelists. Deborah Davis, Professor of Sociology from Yale University. Welcome to our program. Certainly she is the author of the book right now on our table right here. Double happiness over there, the relationship in the family. And also Ms. Han Hua, Media and Communication Consultant, joining us for this discussion as well. I want to begin by asking you, Professor Davis, because you've been doing lifelong research. From a sociology perspective, what have been these changes? Describe to our international audience.
Well, I think there are two things, particularly since 2003. In 2003, the government decided people could divorce without permission from their employer. That is, until 2003, if you wanted to marry or divorce, your employer had to agree. Needless to say, this tamped things down. And so this spike of divorce, China has a divorce rate equal to the United States, and actually it may be higher. This year it will be higher than the United States. So marriages in China are very fragile in comparative perspective.
So it actually coming from a communal decision in a way, because the so-called danwei, the working unit, used to be need to provide you with a letter of permission, whether it is for marriage or for divorce. And now it is becoming much more a private matter, that it is the parties in this union that has made this final decision.
Right, and there was also a big change both legally and culturally in that you don't have to have guilt. That is in this divorce issue. So if one member of a couple is unhappy, unhappy,
Yes.
They can ask for a divorce. And in China, divorce for 80% of people does not use a lawyer, does not use a court. You simply go to the marriage registry, show your ID, the person behind the counter says, do you agree? Is this voluntary? And then the couple themselves have a very short document saying how they wish to divide their resources, and it's done. You can be in and out with no legal counsel in 1 or 2 hours.
But it is a decision between these two people, of course.
It's just like from one extreme to the other extreme. In the past, before 2003, as Professor mentioned, is that the employer not only plays a gatekeeper of the marriage or divorce, they are doing the matchmaking, to make a marriage happen, and they try to block, do everything, try their best to block any divorces from happening. This is what an extreme. And now the extreme is that there's nothing need to be gone through if a divorce is wanted between the couples. That is another extreme compared to the legal process, the registration process.
And what would that mean for some of the other factors that are influencing in marriage and family life? For example, wealth, health, social status,
children,
the concept about the women, about men in the society, and also the issue of being together or being separated geographically. All of this, what would that mean to these?
There are so many. You mentioned the migrant workers. I mean, we must, that's
Let's take a look at this group, for example.
So there are 200 million, 250 million people who have left their villages and come. And initially, and for a while, they were mainly married people. But more recently, the migrants are unmarried. That means they're finding their partners in the city. They're finding their partners without their parents over their shoulder. And there's a lot of cohabitation. There's a lot of moving around. So if we talk about this large group of people, they, and particularly this last 10 or 15 years, are experiencing a new kind of migrant romance, migrant marriage, and the family formation is very, very difficult because of children. Where do children fit? So it's a revolution. There was not anything like this in the last 50 years. I think in some ways the migrant workers who are seen by city people as less educated, less sophisticated, in a way, what I observe, have actually very modern both relationships and the kind of families they're building. They are very unstable, and I think the suffering and the lack of satisfaction is huge. On the side for the urban one, the big story is, of course, that the one-child policy has produced in the last 10 years this surge of couples in which both are only children in the cities. And so you asked, what is one of the major changes is the character of these young marriages. And most people say that this surge of divorce in the last 2 years in particular is the beginning of what we're seeing of this those born after 1980 who are only children, whose parents are deeply invested in their lives, perhaps overly invested in their lives, who have a hard time making their marriages work, in part because the parents are too involved.
Yes.
Do you see that as a reality in Chinese society?
Of course. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I've seen so many parents around me. They're investing too much. Not only too much money, capital into their education, but too much love, too much feelings and emotions into their children. And at one point, one father shared with me his opinion, claiming that, oh, I have designed for my daughter everything in the future. I want her to be a pianist. I want her to be married at the age of 25. I want to have 2 children. One is boy, one is a girl. I was so shocked to hear that, but after that I find it's not just a single case. It's quite not very conventional, but it's growing.
It is.
Yeah, this kind of investment. So it is, to some extent, horrifying.
So
at the
it
same
is
time.
not, the marriage in that case is not a union of 2 people, but rather of too many decision makers during the process. And what would that mean to the fragility or the continuity of those marriages, if we just generally speaking, of course?
Well, this next book I'm writing is specifically on that. And the argument is that the vertical tie between parents and their only children has become so tight that and so strong and multi-sided, just as Ms. Han just said, that the fathers and mothers planning their children's lives. Whereas the tie to your spouse is a voluntary tie. It comes later in your life. You have to develop it. There are disagreements. Couples have to learn to deal with it. But because this generation in the urban life are so involved with their parents, and the parents are so involved in their lives, people, especially with a cell phone, they are talking to their mothers or their fathers all the time. I would contrast it to the parents themselves who were maybe sent down youth or went off to university and didn't see their parents for 3 years. So you have a generation of parents who themselves were quite independent, and yet they are focused on their children in this obsessive way almost to control for success. They deeply love the children. And if you grow up in such a household, both boys and girls, this affects how you interact with your peers and then how you interact with the spouse.
Okay, on the one hand you say there's so much freedom because people can just freely get married and get divorced without having the danwei involved, and that seems to be a new space of freedom for Chinese. On the other hand, you're saying, well, there's too much limit because all the parents are involved, even the grandparents from both sides are involved.
Exactly.
It has to be a, you know, a decade of people decision. So, but exactly what would all of these, whether it's migrant workers or it is the one child of the family, all of these social changes about Chinese marriages, what would they mean to the meaning of marriages?
Generally, marriage is still the gateway to forming a family. China does not yet have any tendency to have children outside of marriage as you have in North America and Europe. So marriage is essential if you want to be a parent and if that's family formation. So that meaning of marriage is absolutely constant. And when you talked about the value of filial piety, that is also what I observe in others, that the rules for a good family, that is parents and children, parents, the upper generation, those are rather constant. That's what you have called traditional values. But in terms of marriage, I mean, there part of it is sexual mores, and there is really a major break in the recent past. The interesting thing is, if you take a long perspective, men could always have partners outside of marriage. Men could take secondary wives. Men who are married visited brothels and concubines. That was a prerogative of men, not for women. Now what we see is a much greater freedom for sexual interaction and intimacy for both women and men.
The traditional belief about what is the best the other party in the marriage have not changed much. Is that what you're saying?
For men, but not for women. I think there's a big change for women. I think women are unwilling to accept the idea that being a good father, breadwinner, is enough.
Hundreds, if not thousands of years, China has been a feudal society. We have all watched the movies of the past, you know, the filial piety, Farewell to My Concubine, just to name a few, that depicts the lives of family and also marital lives. So how have that really changed? Do you think that change about the concepts, about the degrees of acceptance of the other party can influence the quality of family lives or not?
Unlike the West, people may think have a marriage because they want to raise a family. So that is a precondition to have a marriage first. But for Chinese, still for the most Chinese, I think the mainstream is to do it, to make it happen at a certain age, to be a milestone of a new chapter of life. This is the Chinese tradition, and there have been a lot of change because of the social and economic development. Many other dimensions can all both contributing to the change of the marriage maybe at the end of the day, in the long run, but still at current stage, the mainstream Chinese or the Chinese concept towards marriage is still the very traditional one. But I appreciate what Professor Davis just mentioned about the women's change, the women's mentality change towards a marriage, that they are not just satisfying with the husband being just a good father or good
breadwinner
contributor to the family, but also need to be a better half.
Is it more challenging once they have higher requirements, it seems?
It's more challenging for Chinese men, I would say. It's maybe a little bit challenging for Chinese women because they are definitely raising the bar to choose their better half, to choose the husband for the rest of their lives, because I think most of them are still very serious to have only one marriage rather than several times.
There was a tradition of so-called ideological progress, right? Women holding half of the sky. You see that in political movements in China.
From top on down, from Chairman Mao when he mentioned about women can hold half the sky. So that make China nowadays become the highest employment rate for Chinese women to go outside to be full-time workers. About 76% of the Chinese women.
But now there's more a bottom-up approach. Rather, women are demanding themselves about what the kind of marriage they want and what kind of role men are playing. We talk about different social groups. So can all social groups, particularly women in those groups, be able to demand, as what Ms. Han just illustrated? Are we seeing winners and losers as a result of these dramatic changes, even within a family structure, when it comes to the status of women?
One level of winners are rural women. They they have gained in this situation.
Explain, please.
They can now work for themselves. They can leave. They can travel. They make decisions. Young women who have gone out to work to the factories, their relationship to their parents radically changed. They have more cash. They are given the opportunity to make a decision. Will they send the younger brother to school? Will they buy something for that? So we see for millions of rural women, definitely the position has been increased. They
become the pillar of the family.
In their own family of origin. This means as they're growing up.
Right.
And then they marry. I'm not saying it's easy, but that is really a positive gain.
Right.
I also would stress what I've observed in this last 2 years among very educated women. There now really is a small group, but growing, who are thinking they will not marry. This is really a big change.
But on the one hand, you see it as social progress. On the other hand, the others see it as so-called leftover women, that is nickname, ungracefully being given to those women as a result of some kinds of media reporting. So what do you see these very extremes of seeing the same social phenomenon in China?
Well, this leftover women, the Shangnu, I've written about it. Actually,
I knew millions of people have discussed about it, but what about your view?
Right. So demographically, until very recently, it didn't exist. It was a phenomenon people talked about because people were anxious. But actually, you looked at the numbers, women were more likely to marry than men. University-educated women were more likely to marry than their male peers.
So you have a number?
Yes. For Shanghai, it was, if you look at those who are 35 to 39 years old and went to university, 9% of those men had not married by 2010. Only 5% of women in that category had never married. And we have other numbers, but you can see it's low, it's a minority, but men are twice as likely not to marry. However, in the last 2 or 3 years, now we see something different, and that is women choosing not to marry, which is partly that they don't like the kind of marriage that seems to be on offer. And here I don't see it happening to men. Men feel a huge pressure now because partly the parents, to marry means you have to have a house. It's not true always, but they must provide. So what we've seen in the numbers is that the age difference between new husbands and wives in the last 5 years has widened. So women are waiting, but they're marrying older men. They are not marrying their peers. And then at the same time, we're seeing a group of women who I am teaching and who I'm meeting, Lean In, that's one of the groups, who are actually saying to me, we are thinking we don't want to marry, we don't need to marry. And that's also saying we don't want to be mothers. That's a choice.
It's such a wonderful conversation
Very
to
good.
understand better about China's structural reform also in its family lives. This is going to be a big topic, not only for this country, but also for the world as well. Really appreciate it. Deborah Davis, Han Hua. Thank you so much, ladies,
Thank you
for being with us.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight with Tianwei CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo as well. From me, Tianwei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.